What's going on, y'all? I'm KMBest. Let's talk about the best decks in Marvel's Snap, as this meta is one of the most diverse that we've ever seen. However, at the top is still Darkhawk Midrange. Not necessarily the best deck in the metagame, but a solid resident of tier 1 and what really sort of sets the tempo for every other deck in the meta. Now, the reason this deck sets the tempo is because of Shang-Chi and Enchantress. These cards put a limit on what other people can actually do. What can you get away with? Because if you are playing something that loses to Shang-Chi or loses to Enchantress, you end up losing to this deck, and it is a heavy presence in the metagame, so you need to not be playing stuff that loses to Shang-Chi and Enchantress. Naturally, this leads us to our second tier 1 list. What I like to call the Electric Slide, what some others call Silky Smooth. This is the Move Midrange deck that I consider to be the baseline best deck in the game, the deck that you need to be prepared for. Now, how does Shang-Chi and Enchantress influence this? It doesn't seem to run Enchantress, it only runs Shang-Chi. Well, here's the thing. What it does is dodge them entirely. There are no cards in here, as long as you play correctly, that can reasonably be hit by either Shang-Chi or by Enchantress. This gives it a big advantage over the Darkhawk deck in the straight-up matchup, because there are 2 dead cards in that deck. Anytime you are playing a game where only 9 cards are seen in the average game, making 2 of them not exist is extremely powerful, and this deck has that inbuilt matchup advantage against the Darkhawk decks. This is a Move Thanos build pioneered by OKJK. I have come to call it Stegron the Jewels, shout out Run the Jewels, and I think it is a unique take on Thanos and sort of really represents just how oddly specific it can get and just how incredibly loose any of the builds that play it can be. Thanos something is tier 1. There is absolutely a tier 1 Thanos build. I'm not positive what it is. I have some ideas, I have some suggestions. If you're looking for a breakdown of a different Thanos list, you can check in the comments where the Human Spiders Lockjaw Thanos list will be there, or you can check my other video where my Lady Deathstrike Galactus Thanos list will be there. I know one of these Thanos lists is really strong. I don't know which one. I think there is an even chance that it could be something nobody has actually found out yet. There are so many different possibilities with Thanos that it's hard to keep track of all of them, and I firmly believe that one of them has to be tier 1. I don't know if it's any of the ones in this video. I did want to do a quick little highlight of my own personal little backup pocket Thanos list. That's this one. I had a ton of fun with this. I am currently 9-2 in Conquest with it. I did a video on it. It was an absolute blast to play. Nobody expects any of this stuff, but it is sort of a very expensive deck, so I didn't want to just throw that at you and say this is the best Thanos list. I want to be clear, I do not know what the best Thanos list is, but I know one of them is one of the best decks in the metagame. It has to be. Finally, I'd also like to highlight this alternate take on Move. This is my personal take on the Move Wave archetype. The thought process is it gives us a little bit of an edge in mirrors, and it helps us to lock down a lot of just weird stuff that you see in the metagame. There's a lot of decks that just really want to be playing 2 cards on turn 6, 3 cards on turn 6, or, you know, if they're a Magic deck, turn 7, and Wave is just a phenomenal card at locking them down. I do think it's likely just a little bit less proven than the list that I have in tier 1 for the Move deck, but I would consider this sort of a silent performer type deck where I have had a ton of success with it, and I know other people have had a ton of success with similar lists. I think this is probably the best way to play Wave, and if you want to play Wave, I would start with something that looks a lot like this. Here's where things get a little bit tricky. I think outside of what we've talked about, Thanos, the move lists, Darkhawk, that is the clear-cut tier 1. If you want to be playing the best decks in the metagame, you should be playing one of those lists. However, there are about 6 or 7 other lists that I really enjoy and I have been playing recently, and I want to put them on the list too, so you don't come away from this video thinking, okay, well, I can only play those 3. That's the only thing I can compete with. That's not true. So let's take a look at some of the other lists in the metagame that I actually like. These are lists that I have played, I have found some success with, and I have enjoyed doing so. So it's not every list in the metagame, obviously. There are going to be some things that get left out because I just don't like them or I didn't find success with them, but these are those lists. First up is Kitty Shuri. It is a pretty solid list. One of the things that I was working on before the Kitty Pride nerf was a Kitty Shuri list. Me and my friends, me, KJB, Lambie series, a couple other people were working on that list. I think What Am I was a big contributor to it, and I believe Mickey was a big contributor to it. And this is like the spiritual successor to it. I really love that list. This one's a little bit worse, but it is a very solid list. The main goal here is to have an alternate Shuri plan where you can end up playing a bunch of power on turn 6 while giving your opponent priority so you can dodge Shang-Chi. You accomplish this by playing Forge on Kitty Pride, by playing Hulkbuster on Kitty Pride, and then eventually by playing Shuri on Kitty Pride. That is your nut draw. You play like a 28 power Kitty Pride, and then Taskmaster it on turn 6. And there are a lot of decks that just have no answer to that. A lot of decks, like the Move Midrange deck, actually has no answer to that other than going bigger than you in those lanes, and it's not very good at doing it. So that is the kind of deck that this is meant to prey on. Just like a kind of extremely metagamed deck. It's meant to prey on the decks that are trying to go under Shang-Chi. It, of course, is dodging Shang-Chi by just not ever giving their opponent a reasonable target for the card. Next up is what I am affectionately calling she-naut. And that is because a lot of these lists seem to run the Infinaut, and I am one of the biggest Infinaut haters that there ever is. Every time he's in a list, I'm like, get this guy out of here. I hate that guy. So what we've done here instead is just, we took out a bad card, the Infinaut, and we put in a good card, Legion. So now this deck is no longer specifically like a Moon Girl deck. You can just play it like a solid mid-range deck. You don't have to be a combo deck in order to make some good decisions with this. You can just win games with Legion. You can just go like Legion into Hulk after playing like a bunch of high Evo stuff. That's actually just a totally fine thing to do. You can also use Legion to protect your Limbo. You have a Cosmo to do that, but Legion can make it almost impossible to get rid of. So you have additional ways of combating your opponent's cards. In addition, we have Leech, another extremely powerful 5-cost card. I don't necessarily consider him core, but he's pretty sweet, and a lot of things are relying on dropping multiple cards on turn 6, and you know, if you can't play Wave, which we can't because we are trying to drop multiple cards on turn 6, Leech is a great way to target those decks. Next up is a deck that might look a little bit, you know, confusing, maybe a little bit old school to some of y'all. This is what I like to call Dino Scalers. Haha, Dino pun, they have scales, except, you know, I recently learned they don't have scales, they have feathers. That's my bad, I'm sorry, they're actually just big birds. So the main thing that this deck is trying to do, I actually like to compare it to the Move Midrange deck. It's doing similar stuff. Instead of your Craven, you have a Collector. You have the Angela Kitty stuff in there as well. You have a lot of ways to put unique cards into your hand. And I think the thing that actually gives this list an edge is that RNG, things like, you know, Agent Coulson, Nick Fury, they're hard to play against in Conquest. So there's a lot of snap equity with this deck that does not exist with the Move deck, although I will say the Move deck is quite hard to play against as well. So the main thing that I want you to take away from this is that it's less a Devil Dino deck and more just another deck built around Angela and Kitty and Legion and just like playing a bunch of good cards around those cards. Now, your Devil Dinosaur does mean that you are vulnerable to Shang-Chi and Enchantress, so you do give that up. But you don't always have to be playing your Devil Dinosaur on turn 5. You can find ways to protect it. Playing it on turn 6 alongside a Kitty Pride is the classic example. Next up, a couple Destroy decks. This one is a little bit of a minimalist take on the archetype. You are really playing fair here. And if you want to just like play fair, play some good cards, and generally just try to beat your opponents that way, this is a solid list for you. I have enjoyed playing this list because I am, on a fundamental level, a bit of a sucker for fair mid-range decks. This is absolutely one of those. If you want to compare it to something, I would again compare it to the Move mid-range stuff. What we're trying to do is get ahead. We have like the one Shang-Chi. We do everything we can to dodge your opposing Shang-Chis. You dodge the Enchantresses with everything except Null. It's the same kind of thing. That's just how a mid-range deck functions right now. This is what it looks like. So it's occupying a similar space, and obviously occupying that space is quite strong, but I do think it's likely that there are better options occupying that space right now. Next up is the Shuri-Nimrod deck, and this one is a lot more finicky and a lot more over the top. So you look at how the parameters of the metagame are set by Shang-Chi and Enchantress. This deck makes a lot of sense in that context, because if you Shuri a Nimrod and then eat it twice on the final turn of the game, they die. Any deck doing things that are like fair is just gonna die to that amount of points, right? Like they're just absolutely 100% unequivocally dead. The Darkhawk deck is gonna die. The Move Midrange deck is gonna die. All these other decks that are built in the same vein as those decks, they're gonna die. The issue is you don't do it very often, and the rest of the time you end up playing like a half-ass sort of mid-range game plan. You have like a surprise Galactus kind of thing. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just, as soon as this deck stops losing to itself all the time, we're gonna hit a hard reset on the metagame, because you cannot actually beat Shuri into Nimrod into Venom Carnage with either of the mid-range decks that are at the top of tier 1 right now. You just can't do it. I feel I would be remiss not to mention this list. It's just sort of a pet project of mine. I'm a big Evo Midrange fan. Like, everyone knows I kind of like playing mid-range decks. I kind of like playing Evo decks, so obviously I try stuff like this a fair bit. I'm not saying it's like the greatest thing ever, but if you're like me and you want to play just like, all right, I want to play something fair. I want to just play like one card a turn and just do some stuff, and that's going to be enough for me. This might work for you. I mean, I am just such a sucker for high evolutionary stuff, and this is absolutely high evolutionary stuff. One thing that I do expect to get asked about this one is, what if we put Wave in for Professor X? But it's like, it's just worse. I have never actually successfully gotten the 2-cost Abomination plus Wave thing to work. It doesn't work as much as I want it to, and that is just the reality I'm gonna have to live in. So the Professor X is a lot less expected, helps us really scam some lanes, and hopefully that will end up giving you the kind of win that you need when you have a gigantic... All right, y'all, that's it for the tier list this time. I hope you enjoyed it. If you think I missed anything, let me know in the comments below. As always, I am KMBest. Thank you so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it, especially now as I'm going full-time. I appreciate every single one of you. I read every single comment. It makes my dopamine receptors go burr. I will see you in the next one. Have a good one.